Welcome to Short Course, episode 119 for December 15th, 2023. I'm your host, Ben Barry. I'm once again recording this on a Friday night just due to life stuff, but it worked out because this week, I don't want to go too deep into it, I'll just give a brief summary, but this week on Monday, there was a special board meeting, which the bylaws allow the president or any three area directors to call with 48 hours notice to deal with a single topic. The single topic in this case was addressing the discipline of DNROI Troy McManus related to the incident between him and Mark Stamper at Open PCC Nationals, which I can say because I requested to be invited to the meeting and I was not, so I am under no confidentiality. Mark actually forwarded me some emails about this, so it's no secret that that's what the topic of the meeting was. The minutes did come out today on Friday, as is tradition, and basically the minutes say they went into executive session for 3 hours and then voted 6-3 to, quote, adopt the recommendation discussed during the executive session. So we don't actually know what the result was. They didn't even record who voted on which side of the issue. The really surprising thing was that same night, Bruce Gary, Area 1, emailed his section coordinators and other folks to announce that he was resigning effective immediately. His justification for this is his workload is increasing, and by resigning before the end of the year, it means there's more than 2 years left on his term, which will trigger a special election. So we will be having an Area 1 special election sometime early next year. So presumably that'll all play out before the actual scheduled area director elections for next year, which will be Area 2 and Area 5. So that was kind of a bombshell. We still don't know what the actual outcome of this, the meeting was. You know, they voted 6-3 on something, but they haven't actually, nobody's saying what the something is. So we'll find out. There is also the regularly scheduled December board meeting is this Monday, which I have been invited to. So there'll be a lot of things that they'll be trying to wrap up. I do know that the Production 15 vote literally the last item on the agenda, but given that it's time sensitive in that it has to be acted on before the beginning of the year, presumably they'll get to that, but we'll see what else on the agenda gets acted on. I will note the agenda also mentions at the top of the meeting voting to waive 10.2 so that the meeting can be live streamed. First I'm hearing of it, but maybe tune in and Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern, there'll be a live stream to watch. We'll see. But all that said, before we got too far away from it, I did want to do an episode and just talk about IPSC Nationals and how it went and what I thought about it. And to be honest, I sort of have mixed feelings about it. So I went in with very moderate expectations after having shot the Extreme Pan American match at the same range in Volusia at the beginning of this year. And so I was not disappointed, but I was not disappointed because my expectations were low. Now, I'll start this off by saying the staff, they shot the match and then they worked the match in genuinely terrible conditions. It was November in Florida, so it was not particularly cold, but they got dumped on. The rain got, I don't know what the exact amount was, but there was significant rain in the week leading up to the match. And then on some of the days, I believe the Thursday before the match, maybe even into Friday. So I shot on the weekend on the Saturday, Sunday, reshot a half day each day schedule. But I think it was the folks that shot on Thursday and maybe Friday that got rained on pretty good. And so the range was very soggy. We didn't actually have any rain while we were shooting, but the staff definitely had a tough experience both in their shooting days, but then also having to, work in these conditions where they were definitely strapped for help. So nothing I say here is meant as criticism of them. But I will say, I think the main thing that I would tell people about this match is I think a lot of people were hoping or expecting that this would be an IPSC match. This would be something like shooting a little miniature world shoot or a little miniature Extreme Euro Open, something on the caliber of an actual international IPSC match here in the US. And I will say that's not really what this match was. This was a match. It was run under IPSC rules. It followed, it complied with the strictures of IPSC rules, but in sort of spirit, it did not really fully manifest. This match would not prepare you to go overseas and shoot a world shoot or an Extreme Euro or win a major continental championship, a Pan American IPSC type match. So that's kind of the duality that I found myself in. Is for the match that it was, I think it was a fine match, but it definitely was not, I think, a nationals level experience, nor for people in the US curious about, how the rest of the world shoots practical shooting, how IPSC is in the rest of the world. I don't know that they really got that. One example of this is the way that gear is handled, typically speaking, at IPSC matches, which is, generally speaking, you're going to have an equipment check the day before the match where you show up and get your main gun and your backup gun checked, that they comply with division criteria. They'll check your magazines. Basically, gear check is something that's done before you fire your first shot on a day you're not even competing. And then you're also given a form that you fill out with your guns, with the serial number of the gun you're using in the match, and a diagram where you label the position of your holster and all your mag pouches and your magnets and everything. And the idea here is this is a mechanism to check whether you are changing guns without Rangemaster approval or moving stuff around on your belt. So the idea is at every stage you go to, they'll look at the form and sign off, that all your, A, you haven't moved any of your gear, from an illegal position. B, that it's where it was at the last stage, or, when you originally wrote the diagram. And typically at some point during the match, once or twice, you'll get pulled aside and they'll just check that your serial number still matches. So, and the idea here is if you're going to have rules on the books against this stuff, you need to have some enforcement mechanism. And, at your typical USPSA match, even in nationals, unless you go out of your way to tell people, you could switch guns and nobody would be the wiser. I mean, nobody is really tracking you from stage to stage. If you have, the same gun with the same grips and it looks the same, people on your squad probably won't even know the difference. You could go to the safe area and even someone watching you might not even really be able to tell you, So it's one of these things where if we're going to have rules, what's the system for enforcing it? What's the system for catching it? And at this match, there was no equipment check before first shots. I shot Saturday PM, and so when we checked in, we were given a little quarter sheet of paper that had clearly been like photocopy scaled down from what was supposed to be a full-size sheet of paper, or maybe a half, where you wrote your division, power factor, your name, your guns, make, model, serial number, and then it had a box for all 18 stages. And the idea was at each of the 18 stages, you would have the RO on that stage sign off on your sheet and that your gear still matched. And it had the little diagram where you're supposed to draw your holster, the position of your magazine pouches, and if you had any magnets. And so they gave us those sheets, but from what it sounded like, the people that shot Saturday morning, and I mean, definitely earlier in the match, the folks dealing with the rain, I don't even think they thought about those sheets. But even the folks that shot Saturday morning, it sounds like they were not given those sheets at check-in. And some folks, I heard people talking about, they would show up to a stage and they didn't have their sheet, and so they were just given a sheet. And the idea was, well, okay, you fill it out at every stage after this. But the idea of the sheet is if you miss a signature, then potentially you shoot for no score, I guess. And the idea is you gotta get them all checked off. And so if you're not going to have the enforcement behind it, then why do it? And so a lot of people were kind of irked by that. It was like, why make us jump through the hoop of having the appearance of enforcing this rule if you're not actually going to enforce the rule? And, fair enough. I think I get that you're trying, the idea of wanting to project the appearance of complying with the standards, but competitors aren't dumb. They'll see through this stuff. If the ROs don't care, if they're not enforcing the rules, if they're not actually, in a lot of cases, you would just hand them the stack of sheets and they just sign them all. I'd say maybe a quarter of the ROs actually wanted to look at each person's gear and make sure that it was legal. So I get it. We were pressed for time. The squads earlier in the week, some of them had to finish up under headlights or, under compromised lighting conditions because things were running slow. So, there was definitely a pressure to keep things moving. And so that was one of the things that went by the wayside. But if it's going to go by the wayside, just let it go. The idea, I think, giving people the sort of false perception that, oh, this is an IPSC match and we're going to follow these rules, but then it's a facade. It rings sort of hollow. The stages, so it was an 18 stage match. You shot 9 stages a day. Interestingly, they didn't have the stages broken up into zones. So often, especially at IPSC matches, what they'll do is in a zone, you'll have 6 stages. So you'll, in a given day, you'll shoot 3 short, 2 medium, and 1 long. And they'll actually break them up into, 5 or 6 zones where you shoot 6 stages a day, 3, 2, 1. That's not required. IPSC just says, across the match, 3, 2, 1 is the recommended ratio. And so there were definitely some kind of weird match flow things where I think the 3 long courses were all within 5 stages of each other. So it was a lot of rounds all at once. And then you kind of went from there into just a series of all the short courses back to back. I know there were 3 bays. Basically there were 3 bays with doubled up short courses, or they'd have them running next to each other and they'd split the squad. So the stages were balanced in that sense, but the match flow kind of had this kind of roller coaster aspect where you had these big high round count stages, a few of which were pretty high hit factors. They were some of the closest shooting in the whole match. And then you kind of went from that into back to back to back to back to back to back to back, short and medium courses. But, within that, the actual stage flavor itself, I mean, this is hard to say definitively because, IPSC is not one thing. Every region, every area has its own flavor of IPSC. But for example, in IPSC, you are allowed to mandate one-handed shooting on an entire short or medium course. And an IPSC medium course is actually up to 24 rounds, where in USPSA, for whatever reason, our medium course goes from 12 to 20 rounds. Don't ask me why. So you can have a whole 12-round stage where the whole thing has to be, the stage brief just says you have to shoot the whole thing strong hand, the whole thing weak hand, again, up to 24 rounds. And there was only one stage that had any one-handed shooting, and it was the whole stage was a 12-round stage where you basically shot 4 shots freestyle through a small port, and then you had a Rhodesian wall, which is one of these walls. Typically, it has a rope in the middle, and you have to hold the rope to lean around it. But in this case, you're able to use the port cut in the wall and just hold on to that with your hand. But basically, you had to shoot 4 shots around one side of the port, strong hand only, or around one side of the wall, strong hand only, and then 4 shots around the left side of the wall, weak hand only. And so that was the only one-handed shooting in the match. So again, it was, the stages didn't violate the IPSC rules, but they also, there was something lacking in the sense that there wasn't necessarily using that aspect of IPSC that is available, where you do see that kind of one-handed shooting tested in that way by dictating it in the stage brief. To some degree, if these were all, I mean, if you just told me, hey, these are all USPSA stages, really the only big difference would be whether you could cut a few corners and go outside the shooting area in a few spots. But overall, the flavor was very, very samey. It wasn't that different from what you would see at a typical USPSA match. Even the stage where one-handed shooting was required, it was required physically, which you could do at a USPSA match. You could set up that exact same stage, and it's a legal USPSA stage. The overall stages, I think, were, so there was a handful, maybe 10 no-shoots, something like that, across the entire match. Targets partialed with no-shoots, and there was no hard cover of any kind. So there was a lot of open targets, which has its own challenges and drawbacks. I mean, I'll admit I racked up a lot of Charlies and Deltas by going too fast on the open targets, but it definitely was not the stages, the target presentations that you saw here. There were a lot of 2 targets, shoulder to shoulder, sometimes even 3, which drives up the round count, drives up the hit factor, but is not typically what, when you think of technical, challenging, high shot difficulty, low hit factor IPSC stages, which not every IPSC stage is like that, but this definitely was sort of more of more USPSA-ish. It just, there were a lot of high hit factors. And, the 3-2-1 format says, 1 out of every 6 of your stages has to be a long course, but it doesn't say it has to be a 32 round long course. You could take out 3 of the targets and make it a 26 round long course. And in a lot of cases, most of the stages that were the most of the long courses and even some of the mediums could have a few targets taken out or even just spread around. So if you imagine 2 targets shoulder to shoulder, if you're being forced into the position to shoot one of them, well, the one that's a little more open, if you move it 6 or 8 or 10 feet over, then you have the option to roll in or roll out while shooting that target. So, there are opportunities to open things up and make it so you're not just shooting basically 4 shots at 2 targets shoulder to shoulder. So there was a lot of that. And so again, as a match, it wasn't really a problem. They were fine stages. Some of them were quite good. I did like a number of them. And there was stage 18, I believe it was the one per shot stage. And so that was one where having the targets shoulder to shoulder did add some dimension to it. It added some challenge in the sense that you're having to transition on every shot. And so having the targets shoulder to shoulder doesn't drive up the hit factor the way it often does on some of the other stages where you saw that. But, just in general, I think with the exception of a few targets, there was, one 35-yard shot. You had to take it a very, very mild lean. There were a few over-the-top swingers that were really spicy. There were a number of over-the-top swingers, but I'd say most of them were quite doable. But aside from a few targets in the match, the shot difficulty was fairly easy. There were a few distance shots, a few really, like I said, aggressive movers. But comparatively, this was very much a sort of fast-shooting, high-hit factor match. And again, not necessarily a bad thing, but if you went into it expecting this to be something like an international IPSC match, it just wasn't that. And so, that's why I'm mixed. I'm not disappointed in it, but like I said, I kind of came in with pretty moderate expectations. One thing that was very sort of IPSC about the match that I'm told you do see a lot more overseas was the idea of pre-scoring. So, and again, a lot of this was most of the stages had 2, maybe 3 ROs. And so they were definitely shorthanded. And so in a lot of cases, they would definitely be scoring ahead. So you have the timer RO, obviously following the shooter. And in some cases, you'd have the tablet RO going down one side. And, sometimes you'd have the third RO going down the other and using the, IPSC hand signals to indicate the scoring of the targets. And so, you might get to see the last half of your targets, but in a lot of cases, they were already scored and in some cases pasted before you got to look at them, which is more of an IPSC thing. And I think that is related to this idea that you just kind of have to trust the ROs more, where, my preference is if you can in a match, you have the shooter follow the timer RO, the timer RO calls out every target to the scorekeeper. And then, well, ideally the staff resetters sort of follow them around and paste and reset behind them, or even in a competitor reset environment, they wait for the timer RO to call it out. But I recognize that there is some advantage to being able to paste ahead. I don't know how big it is. I mean, ultimately the stage only runs as fast as the slowest target to paste and reset. And so if you get all the easy targets close to the start of the shooting area reset, but it still takes a while to walk down to the farthest one and paste that and come back. How much time have you saved? There's an argument to be had there, but that is a very common thing in IPSC. One other thing about the stages that I thought was, again, I'm kind of mixed because this is actually something that from what I hear is becoming more common in IPSC, is the idea of having stages where you start anywhere in the shooting area, which to me, just from a stage design perspective, I think is a huge miss. I think you give up a lot of interesting choices when you just let the shooter start standing somewhere, even if it's, they have to take one step. They just, you start straddling a stick or toes touching somewhere or something like that. I think just adding that little bit of complexity, so you're basically not just setting up square to your first target and then just basically doing a standing flat-footed draw to that target, where you have to draw and step or draw and turn or do something to add a little bit of variety to the start position. And also, I think by picking a well-balanced start position, you actually create options. You make it so that going left or right or going forward or back first, you can actually do some interesting things with that. And I will say I kind of cribbed there were two, well, really three stages of this match that sort of had a U-shaped shooting area, and I kind of cribbed them all and used them for a local Sir Walter match as a stage design there. But I put the start position in the middle of the U, and so your choice was basically, do you run straight to the front left corner and then kind of follow the U around? Do you run straight to the back corner? I think that actually, even just by moving the start position, it added dimension and options to the stage, not in a way where it added more complexity once you decided on your stage plan, but just you could sort of choose, do you want to step in and start shooting sooner or run to the back and then shoot everything sort of back to front? So that's one of those things where, in my opinion, it's a missed opportunity, but I also recognize that is, I think, becoming more common in IPSC. So, in that sense, I guess you kind of get what you pay for. That was sort of delivering on that part of the experience. The one other thing that also is very much an IPSC thing that was definitely enforced here is in the IPSC rules, with an asterisk that I'll come back to, but in the IPSC rules, there is no taking a sight picture at make ready or dry firing. So if you have a dot and you need to check it, you're supposed to aim at the ground, not at a target. And then there's no pointing the gun at the target, dry firing through the stage, or air gunning, in your visualization or anything like that. It's, hey, load the gun up, holster it, get ready to shoot. Make ready is not your time to get an extra personal visualization walkthrough. It is your time to make ready and shoot. And if you're not, then in this, I didn't actually see this happen, but the idea is, if you're not, unload, go to the back of the line. Don't waste everyone's time, because at the end of the day, we got to keep the match moving. And it is an interesting paradox, right? That we enforce a clock on the group walkthrough, but not on the individual. That you only get 5 minutes to walk through the stage, but at make ready, especially in the US, most ROs will just stand there for pretty much as long as you want to take. And so, the question is, how do you enforce a clock on that? Well, the IPSC take is there's not an explicit clock. The RO isn't standing there with a stopwatch, but if you can't dry fire, you can't aim at a target, and what else is there to really do at make ready? You can stand there with your hand on the gun and, visualize through the stage and just take time standing there, at which point the RO culturally will start to get a little more agitated at you. But it's an interesting take that, in terms of, everybody talking about match flow and, going to, instead of a 5-minute walkthrough, go to a 3-minute walkthrough. It'll save you, this much amount of time. It's like, well, if we could just get people to take shorter make readies and longer walkthroughs, maybe that would be better. But so that was definitely an IPSC both rule and cultural thing that was enforced. The one asterisk that I mentioned earlier is, it was interesting that the handgun rules say no aiming at a target. The PCC rules, because in IPSC, PCC is treated more closer to a rifle division, and technically you're not supposed to have PCC and handgun in the same match. They're scored in separate matches, and their results aren't comparable, which has other side benefits I'll get to in a second. But the PCC rules do say you can take a sight picture on a given target as long as it's designated on the stage, unless the Ranger Master has posted in the WSB that you can't. And so it wasn't in the WSB, but de facto, even the PCC guys weren't allowed to take a sight picture at a target, which, that's just one of those little nuances where even I didn't realize until I was talking to a PCC shooter after the match. And I was looking at the handgun rulebook and the PC rulebook, and they actually have slightly different rules there, which is confusing. But it is interesting in the sense that on that stage that I mentioned earlier, where you had to shoot through the port and then basically hang off the wall, either holding onto the port with one hand or holding onto a rope, because the PCC match was technically a separate match, they actually had a separate shooting area. So where, as a handgun shooter, you had to stay in the little box, the platform right behind the wall, the the PCC guys had a separate rectangular shooting area where, maybe a yard back and much wider, where they could see all the targets just standing flat-footed, because there was no way that they could practically lean around the wall and shoot the PCC one-handed. And there's something to that. I have to recognize that's an interesting way to solve the problem of how do you have matches where you still want to challenge pistol shooters, but you want to allow PCC shooters an alternate way to engage the stage as well. And in this case, it was as simple as they just get their own shooting area. I thought, okay, that fair enough. So on the whole, I'm glad I went. It definitely doesn't, I think this is not the caliber of match that we should be calling a nationals. I definitely think there's more to it than that. But, if you just kind of went into it the way I did, just kind of looking at it as kind of a, state level match, it was fun. It was a fine match. I will be interested to see how Rio Salado handles hosting IPSC Nationals in, I believe it's April. Yeah, it's going to be in the spring, so it's going to be 5 or 6 months between the two matches, which is obviously a quick turnaround for the folks trying to qualify for a World Shoot team. But it will definitely be, if you look at the way Area 2 has run, especially the last few years, they've been very IPSC-ish kind of stages, very challenging, technical, lots of movement, not shooting a bunch of targets from one spot. So hopefully they're able to bring that sort of spirit to the match. I don't imagine, I have no plans to shoot that match. I would love to, but I just logistically, I don't think it'll work out. But I look forward to sort of seeing from afar what they can do with it. And I would like to see, going into the future, I definitely would like to see USPSA as a headquarters at least investing some fraction of what we invest in the various USPSA nationals in trying to make sure that the IPSC nationals do represent what IPSC is. And part of that is having people who do travel internationally and can provide that context and that experience, which is not most people. I'm the first person to admit I've never actually shot an IPSC match overseas. I would love to, but I also would like, I'd like us as an organization to be able to import some of that and bring it here, right? Instead of taking people overseas, if we can bring what is unique about IPSC matches and actually put that experience on over here, I don't see why that can't be done. So I at some point maybe I'll do a podcast about my shooting, talk about the stages more in detail. I don't want to drag this one out too much longer, but I just figured it'd be good to kind of give people a perspective on it, because I know, for example, I was looking at the IPSC rules around production and base pads, and there had been some clarifications before this match about the rulebook says in production and production optics, you're allowed to have base pads that add negligible weight, but what does negligible mean? At one point, there was an interpretation proposed that said no more than 5% of the weight of the magazine, but 5% of what? Was it going to be 25 grams? That's also a number that's been thrown around. And, I wanted to make sure that I was compliant with IPSC rules. And as it was, that was not even remotely checked. There was so the way chrono was handled is on stage 18, 2 out of the 10 folks on your squad were randomly picked to go to chrono, and hopefully they were able to go there and back and, not delay the whole squad, because obviously after 18, you had to walk all the way back to 1. So you didn't want to hold the whole squad up, but 2 guys went to chrono and presumably got their gear checked. I'm sure if you were shooting a classic or standard gun, it got put in the box, that sort of thing. But I would be really surprised if anybody told me that they were shooting production and had their base pads weighed. So there's that element of, if you just read the IPSC rulebook and look at what IPSC matches are like, and then you come to a match like this expecting it to be like that, it's not exactly. I'm glad I was prepared. I'm glad all my gear was legal, but there definitely was not the enforcement that there could have been. And like I said, I'll be curious to see how that runs at Rio Salado, and hopefully going forward we can, as an organization, I would like to see us put more assistance into running the IPSC Nationals close to the level of resources that we invest in running the regular USPSA Nationals. Now, obviously, there's a whole budget conversation, and we're losing money, and one of the main things losing money is the USPSA Nationals. So I'm not trying to say in the short run that we should make IPSC Nationals lose $100,000 the way that all the US Nationals do. But it is one of those things that's on my radar as if we can help bring this match up to that same level of quality while also sort of bringing that actual international flavor. So it's not just the same sort of match, just with a slightly different coat of paint. I think that would be good, but we will see where that goes. Well, that wraps up this episode of Short Course. If you want to get in touch with me, my email is ben@berryshooting.com. Talk to you next time.